Thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm actually not one of the contributors to the volume that's being launched here today. And I am kind of here to present, I guess, a different side of the, I guess, publication business. Myself having a job in academia and having been involved in academic publishing, I also find it sometimes, or most of the time, quite frustrating and alienating. So we have these really long publication cycles when by the time your research is finally published, it's already desperately out of date. It is usually published in some obscure journals in English, so people in the region would probably never have access to it. It is also kind of an enterprise that exploits academics' labor and then charges people huge subscriptions, and anyone who wants to read my article that is due to be published in nationality papers would have to pay something like $30 for the pleasure of downloading it. And it is in English, so again, there's this issue of access. So with my kind of feminist intervention here, I want to talk about a culture of zine publishing that I've kind of become involved in during the past couple of years living and working in Bishkek. This again kind of poses wider questions of our role as academics, how do we manage our identities as scholars, but also as activists. And myself, I find that zines have been really, involvement in zine publication has been a very liberating experience for myself. Finding this new voice of writing, a new style of writing, not having the pressure of deadlines, and having kind of the liberty to express my views in a more defined way, have all been quite positive experiences. I would say that the zine culture has a potential of serving as a kind of a transdisciplinary tool that connects policy, politics, academia, and art. Let's start, if you could click for the next slide, with the explanation of what a zine is. The word itself is derived from fanzine, which itself is a kind of a mix of two words, so fan and magazine. And it takes roots in a culture of non-commercial DIY publications that initially were done by fans of science fiction, but zines are usually created by any kind of marginal group or people with very specific interests who want to write and share information about their topic of interest. It has been also been it was associated with anarcho-punk scene and just broader DIY ethics and aesthetics. In the 90s, there was also a significant movement for feminism that included zine publishing by riot girls. So if you're familiar, it's a feminist punk group, and they started this movement of zine making. So feminist groups anywhere could start their own zine under this general umbrella of riot girl. So it appears that this is kind of just a Western adaptation, but in fact it is not. So just to give you a preview, I'm going to talk here about traditional dissident samizdat in the Soviet Union, and then talk a little bit about feminist samizdat history in the USSR, and then turn to the zine that I have been involved in personally, which is called The Weird Sisters, which is published in Bishkek. So actually, every girl probably who grew up in our region has been involved at some point in her life in zine culture or samizdat, because every girl in high school creates, like she has a notebook that is called anketa, that is kind of handed around the classmates, and that asks them questions like, what is your favorite color, what is your zodiac sign, you know, and then share some poems and draw some pictures, and that becomes kind of a self-publication type of of that girl. Also it was, for example, common in the Soviet time, especially also among women, to have notebooks where they would collect their favorite poems, right? So they would have to copy them out by hand, because again, like books were rare, or not everybody could get hold of the certain authors. But apart from this sort of like very grassroots samizdat, there was, turn to next slide, this tradition of dissident thought and activism and samizdat, most of which was, of course, concentrated in Moscow and Leningrad, but also there were samizdat initiatives in all the Soviet republics. So in the 1970s, non-conformist dissident groups were engaged in a number of publications, such as Journal 37, and The Hours, or Часы, Almanach, in Leningrad. Of course, we know that this was illegal, that this kind of self-publication type journals and brochures had to be multiplied by typewriter, so they usually would be carbon copies of a typewritten text, and then they would be kind of circulated kind of illegally in the close circles of friends. People could be persecuted and sent to prison for distributing this kind of illegal literature. But then in the later periods of Soviet Union, in 70s, and especially in late 80s, samizdat was much more tolerated and became more widespread, also with the wider spread of the multiplying technology, right? So some people could have access to Xerox, and at later points even PCs and printers. If you turn to the next slide, within this tradition of 70s dissident samizdat, there's also a really interesting history of feminist samizdat. In her address in the first feminist conference in Moscow, Woman as an Object and Subject of Art, one of the creators of a journal or an almanac called Woman and Russia, Женщина и Россия, Natalia Malachovskaya, recalled that so women were engaged in samizdat, like Journal 37, along with men, but she said that women within the collective started feeling like non-conformists within this non-conformist group, right? The articles, the kinds of things they wanted to publish were rejected by the men in the collective as too radical, yeah, too far out there, too socially pointed. In other words, too dangerous subjects. So then, in 1979, Malakhovskaya, Goricheva, and an artist Mamonova came together and started a journal for women, which was called Women and Russia. And after the first issue came out, which discussed the horrible conditions in the birth clinics, yeah. So the humiliation that women had to go through when they gave birth, and also when they needed to get an abortion, was described there. And yeah, also the conditions of childcare in kindergartens, in summer camps, in schools were criticized. So this only 10 copies were printed of this first issue, and they quickly were distributed quite widely. Some copies made it abroad across the border, and they were translated into various foreign languages. And this brought the unwanted attention of the KGB, and persecution followed. So the editors and the authors of this journal were threatened. Their children were threatened, and as a result, they had to stop publication of this particular almanac. But they started a journal called Maria. And in the first issue of this journal, they said, there's enough female names in our country, and there are more women than KGB agents. So they wanted to continue with this work that they were doing. So these journals then engaged in not just kind of the social issue discussions, but also they had political discussions like on feminism and Marxism, religion, pedagogy, women and art, old age and womanhood, and other important issues. So they also made a statement when the war when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. They also made a statement calling on women to not let their children be sent to war. So basically, despite the very conservative bent and essentialist kind of ideology of this group of women, this is a really interesting history of feminist samizdat. Also, when I read like some of their recollections, they said that they had articles sent to them from all over the Soviet Union, so also they had some articles sent from Central Asia, so I would really like to read some of those. Thank you. Now, turning quickly to actually what is happening with currently with samizdat. So here I just have a small collage of some of the publications that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there are more that I'm just not I'm not familiar with. So I brought some copies. These are my own private copies of zines that have been published, and one of them is published in Kazakhstan. It's called Udol. I can kind of spread them around for you to look at, but I would want them back, please.
Please don't leave with one of those.
Yeah, so with the Weird Sisters, for example, I mean, all of them are downloadable online, so you can print your own copy, free of charge. Some zines are published regularly. So with Weird Sisters, for example, we just kind of are about to release our 4th issue. but some are just kind of a one-off affair. Yeah? The collective can also be changing. Could you turn to the next slide? So, for example, speaking of experience of working with Weird Sisters, it is an initiative that is supported by an organization called STAB, and it's based in Bishkek. It's called, it stands for School of Theory and Activism Bishkek. STAB provides kind of the informational support, but also people who are who work in STAB and people who are affiliated with STAB are contributors to Weird Sisters. But it's not kind of entirely, it's not a STAB creation as such. As I said, we've already had 4 issues, and it started with from my conversation with a colleague and a good friend, Oksana Shatalova, who's an art curator, one of the art curators at STAB, artistic directors. And basically, when she engaged in kind of conversations online in social media, she kept encountering the same kind of sexist arguments that she didn't think that people could use those arguments anymore, but in fact they are using them, right? So she said, why don't we make this kind of frequently asked questions issue of the zine, call it fuck sexist. So it's FAQ, sexist. But basically, we created this, I would say, rather quickly on this kind of wave of enthusiasm, finally answering all the questions so that no sexist can happen. But we were not actually addressing the sexist. Our audience is not sexist, right? It's hopefully the feminists. But it's a kind of experience that allows us to formulate these answers, to feel more confident in these answers. So zine making in itself, I would say, is a kind of a consciousness-raising experience. It is also a way of articulating our ideas, a way of building some kind of solidarity among ourselves. And then we can see through this process that it's not just kind of our personal inadequacies or failures as women. It is all part of the kind of systemic processes that are taking place that our lives are just an example of. So when we work as a collective, sometimes some people join us, sometimes some people would leave. We don't have deadlines, so it's because all of us have jobs. When we started, we just worked remotely via a Facebook thread, right? A personal kind of message thread within a group, sharing files online and doing the corrections online and exchanging ideas like that. And then because some of us are working abroad at the time. So and then we started also meeting in person, so as a group. And most recently, our last issue we created as a result of a workshop on collage making. Right? So we just got together and we made collages. So yeah, it can work both ways. So you don't actually need to have a collective of people who can physically meet, on a regular basis. And we also decided that editor's position will be rotating. So, so this is our latest issue, fresh off the press. So among the samples that you have circulating in the audience, you can see the latest mock-up of our 4th issue, which we dedicated to ideas of beauty and body positivity. And our slogan there is out with beauty. This was our kind of weird collage making session. And I forgot to tell you about the title also. It's called Weird Sisters. The name of the zine is in English, even though it's published in Russian. And it is because we use, it's a reference to Shakespeare's Macbeth, where we have three witches of ambiguous gender identity. So they appear to be women, yet they have beards. And yeah, they have a certain role of prophesizing and saying uncomfortable things, yeah, to the people in power. So we also see ourselves as, we kind of appropriate this name. People might call us weird, people might call us queer. We own that, and we see ourselves as kind of occupying this dissident position in the conditions of the current conservative term that we're all witnessing. So I guess I'll stop here. Thank you very much.